What do you do when a single missile fired at dawn can push two nations past the point of no return? Right now, in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, that question is not theory. It is happening. Before we go 1 second further, hit like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and share this with one person who needs to understand what is unfolding in the Gulf right now, because by the time this story is finished, you will see why timing is everything. Early this morning, a massive oil tanker was struck by an Iranian missile while passing through one of the most important waterways on Earth. Within hours, the United States answered with a wave of strikes that hit multiple targets inside Iran at once. This was not a small skirmish. This was a fast, coordinated, and heavy response, and it is reshaping the balance of power in the region in real time. Let's start with what actually happened, because the details matter more than the headlines. The tanker involved is a massive vessel, over 300 meters long, carrying hundreds of thousands of tons of crude oil. It was moving through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow channel where roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes every single day. This strait is not just a shipping lane, it is one of the most sensitive choke points on the planet. Every ship that passes through it is watched, tracked, and in moments like this, threatened. At dawn, a missile struck the tanker near its midsection. The ship caught fire almost immediately. Crew members on board were thrown into chaos as smoke filled the deck and the fire spread across a vessel loaded with flammable cargo. Some crew members did not survive. Others were pulled from the water by military helicopters that happened to be operating nearby, a detail that tells you the region was already on edge before this attack even happened. This is the part people often miss. Ships like this do not sail alone in dangerous waters without protection. Naval forces were already positioned close by, watching, waiting, ready to respond if something went wrong. And something did go wrong, in the worst possible way. The missile used in this attack was not some crude, improvised weapon. It was a modern anti-ship missile built to skim low over. The water-soaked radar systems struggled to detect it until the final seconds before impact. That kind of weapon does not end up in the hands of a group by accident. It takes years of development, testing, and military investment. Whoever fired it knew exactly what they were doing and knew exactly what kind of ship they were aiming at. And that is the detail that should stop you in your tracks. This was not a random target. A tanker of that size, carrying that much oil, moving through that specific stretch of water is not something you hit by accident. Someone chose this target on purpose. Someone wanted the world to see it burn. Within minutes of the strike, word reached the highest levels of government. Reports came in that lives had been lost. And when a nation loses its people in an attack like this, the response is almost never slow. It is almost never quiet. It is almost always immediate, and it is almost always meant to send a message just as loud as the one that was sent to them. That is exactly what happened next. In under 2 hours, military forces launched a series of coordinated strikes against multiple locations at once. Not one target, not two. Several hit almost simultaneously, using fighter jets, precision-guided bombs, and long-range missiles. This kind of response does not happen without serious planning already sitting on the table, ready to be activated the moment the order came down. That tells you something important. The plans for a response like this were not written overnight. They were prepared long before this morning, waiting for the moment they would be needed. The first target was the naval base believed to be responsible for launching the missile in the first place. Not just the boats that fired it, but the docks, the fuel supplies, and the command buildings that keep that kind of operation running. Destroying a base like this does not just punish what already happened. It slows down what could happen next. The second target was even more strategic. It was this facility believed to manufacture the very type of missile that struck the tanker. This is the difference between putting out a fire and taking away the matches. Hitting a launch site stops one attack. Hitting a production facility makes the next 10 attacks harder to carry out. The third and fourth targets focused on radar and communication systems, the eyes and ears that allow a military to track ships moving through the strait and coordinate an attack in the first place. Without radar coverage, a navy is operating half blind in the very waters where visibility matters most. And the fifth target was something officials described as especially significant, a hidden underground facility believed to house command infrastructure, possibly linked to the planning of the tanker attack itself. When a military strikes a target like that, it is not just reacting to what happened. It is trying to remove the ability to plan what happens next. 5 targets, one continuous wave of strikes, all within roughly 100 minutes. To put that in perspective, this is one of the fastest, largest coordinated military responses this region has seen in years. It tells you that the decision to respond was not made lightly, and it was not made slowly either. Now here's where the story becomes bigger than just one attack and one response, because this single event is sending shockwaves far beyond the two countries directly involved. Start with the price of oil. Within hours of the tanker attack, oil prices jumped sharply, one of the biggest single-day moves in years. And here is the part that should worry you. This price spike happened while the strait was still technically open. Ships were still moving through it. No wider blockade had been declared. This was the market reacting to a threat, not even a full closure. If the strait were ever actually shut down completely, even for a short period, the price shock the world just saw this morning would look small by comparison. Every gas station, every airline ticket, every product shipped by sea, all of it runs through waters like this one. When those waters become dangerous, the entire global economy feels it within hours, not weeks. Then there's the reaction from nearby countries in the Gulf region. Several neighboring governments issued public statements within just a few hours of each other, all calling for an end to attacks on commercial ships in the strait. On the surface, that sounds like a simple call for peace. But listen closely to who that message was aimed at. It was not directed at the country that carried out the military response. It was directed squarely at the country that fired the missile. That is not a neutral statement. That is regional governments quietly siding with the response, even if they will never say those exact words out loud. When your neighbors stop defending you in public, it tells you something about how isolated you have become. Now think about the involvement of a major global power watching from a distance, one that depends heavily on oil flowing safely through this exact waterway. That country's government released a statement expressing concern and calling for the protection of international shipping lanes. On paper, that sounds diplomatic and cautious. But underneath it, that statement is a warning. A warning to the country that fired the missile that even its closest economic partners will not stand behind actions that threaten global shipping. When your biggest ally starts talking about the importance of safe waters instead of defending your actions, that is not support. That is distance. Here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. Was this attack even a fully coordinated decision? Or was it something else entirely? A decision made by lower-level military commanders acting on orders that were never officially canceled, while political leaders were still arguing about what to do next. If leadership inside that country has been struggling to agree on a unified strategy, then an attack like this might not represent a deliberate declaration of war. It might represent a breakdown, a moment where no one at the top managed to stop an operation that was already set in motion. And if that is true, then the massive response that followed was aimed at a government that may have already been quietly searching for a way out of this conflict, not looking for a way to escalate it further. If you are finding this breakdown useful, do something simple for me right now. Tap that subscribe button, because stories like this move fast, and you do not want to miss the next update. It costs you nothing, and it helps this channel keep bringing you analysis like this. Let's talk about the people who almost never get mentioned by name in stories like this, the crew members on that tanker. These are not soldiers. They are merchant sailors, ordinary working people from different countries around the world, doing a job that keeps the global economy running. They load cargo, they navigate dangerous waters, and they trust that the shipping lanes they travel through are protected by international law. When a missile hits a ship like that, it is not just a military event. It is a group of families somewhere in the world waking up to the worst news of their lives. Some crew members did not make it. Others were pulled out of burning water, rescued at the last possible moment. Their survival came down to the fact that military helicopters happened to be close enough to reach them in time. A little further away, and this story would have ended very differently. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture, because a moment like this is never just about one ship or one strike. It is about power, timing, and what each side is willing to risk to send a message. Military pressure has been building in this region for a long time, not just this week. Multiple strikes over recent months have already targeted missile production sites, transportation infrastructure, power systems, and military logistics inside the country responsible for this attack. Taken together, these strikes represent one of the most significant weakening campaigns this region has experienced in decades. That is the military side of the story. But there is a political side running underneath it, and it moves differently. A country under this kind of sustained pressure is not just a military machine. It is a political system trying to hold itself together while making decisions under extreme stress. And political systems under that kind of stress do not always respond the way you expect. Sometimes they escalate. Sometimes they quietly search for an exit. Diplomatic back channels reportedly stayed open even in the hours after this attack, suggesting that at least some parts of the government were still exploring whether there was a path toward ending hostilities rather than deepening them. That detail rarely makes headlines, but it might be the single most important piece of this entire story. Because here is the real question, hiding underneath everything you just heard. Is this the moment things get dramatically worse? Or is this the final painful spike of violence before something changes? Nobody can answer that with certainty right now. Not military analysts, not government officials, not anyone watching from the outside. What we can say is this. The military balance in this region has shifted hard against the side that fired first. Regional neighbors have publicly distanced themselves from that side. A major global economic partner has issued a warning wrapped in diplomatic language, and oil markets are already pricing in fear before anything worse has even happened. Every single one of those signals is pointing in the same direction, even if nobody knows exactly where that direction leads. Think about how strange that is for a second. The world is currently watching a government whose next move could shape the price of oil, the safety of global shipping, and the direction of a regional war, and nobody outside that government's inner circle actually knows which of those two paths it is on. That uncertainty is exactly why the next 48 to 96 hours matter so much. If diplomatic channels stay open and if leadership on the other side manages to reach some kind of internal agreement, this could become the peak of the crisis, rather than the beginning of something far worse. But if internal coordination continues to break down, if orders keep getting issued at the operational level without clear political direction from the top, then more incidents like the tanker attack become more likely, not less, each one carrying its own risk of triggering another response just as fast and just as forceful as the one the world saw this morning. There's also a psychological layer to all of this that rarely gets discussed. A response this fast, this coordinated, and this large is not only a military action. It is a message aimed at every other actor in the region who might be watching this situation and thinking about testing the water themselves. When a government responds within hours, hitting 5 targets almost simultaneously, it is telling every other potential adversary in the region exactly how quickly and how heavily it is willing to act. That kind of message tends to travel fast through military and intelligence circles, often faster than official statements ever could. At the same time, a response this large also raises the stakes for everyone involved, including countries that had nothing to do with the original attack. Every nation whose ships pass through that strait, every economy that depends on stable oil prices, every ally with troops or interests in the wider region, all of them are now watching more closely than they were yesterday. A regional conflict that stays contained to 2 countries is dangerous enough. A regional conflict that starts pulling in economic partners, oil markets, and neighboring militaries is a different kind of danger altogether. Before we get into where this could go next, I want to ask you something directly. If you had to guess right now, do you think this becomes the high point of the crisis or the start of something bigger? Drop your answer in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of moment where different people are going to see this very differently, and I want to know what you think before I share where the evidence seems to be pointing. Let's bring this back to something simple, because with so many moving pieces, it is easy to lose the human center of this story. A ship caught fire in the middle of the night. People died doing an ordinary job in dangerous waters. Within hours, a government on the other side of that attack unleashed one of the fastest, most coordinated military responses this region has witnessed in years. And within that same short window of time, oil markets moved, neighboring governments spoke up, and a major global power quietly signaled where its patience was running out. None of these pieces exist separately. They are all connected, all reacting to each other in real time, and all being watched by millions of people who have never set foot anywhere near the Strait of Hormuz, but whose daily lives are still tied to what happens there. The price you pay at the pump, the cost of goods that arrive by ship, the stability of a region that touches nearly every major economy on Earth. All of it runs through this one narrow stretch of water, and all of it was shaken by a single missile fired before sunrise. What makes this moment different from so many others in recent memory is the speed. In the past, military and diplomatic responses to attacks like this often took days to unfold, giving the world time to absorb what had happened before the next move arrived. This time, the entire sequence, attack, confirmation, military authorization, and a 5-target strike happened within a matter of hours. That speed tells you something important about how ready both sides already were for this kind of moment. Neither side was caught off guard. Both sides had plans sitting ready, waiting for a trigger. And that is perhaps the most sobering part of this entire story. This did not feel like the beginning of a plan. It felt like the execution of one that had already existed for a long time, just waiting for the right moment to be set in motion. So where does this leave us? A tanker still smoldering in the water, families waiting for news about crew members who have not yet been accounted for, a military campaign that has now degraded several major pieces of an opposing nation's naval and missile infrastructure in a single morning, oil markets bracing for whatever comes next, and a region full of countries that are no longer sitting quietly on the sidelines, but are instead sending clear signals about where their patience ends. The next few days will decide whether this becomes the moment things finally start moving toward an end, or the moment everything gets pulled deeper into a conflict that few people fully understand, and even fewer can control. Either way, one thing is already certain. The waters of the Strait of Hormuz will never be looked at the same way again, and neither will the fragile, fast-moving balance of power that runs straight through them. There is one more angle to this story that deserves real attention because it explains why this specific ship, out of dozens moving through those waters at any given time, became the target. A vessel of that size, carrying that much crude oil, connected to multiple countries through its ownership, its flag, its crew, and its cargo destination, is not just a ship. It is a symbol. Hitting a vessel with that many international connections sends a message to every country involved at once. It tells shipping companies, oil buyers, and foreign governments alike that no flag and no ownership structure guarantees safety in these waters anymore. That is not an accident of geography. That is a deliberate choice designed to maximize the number of nations who suddenly have a stake in what just happened. And once that many nations have a stake in an incident, the pressure to respond stops being a decision made by one government alone. It becomes something closer to a shared expectation. Allies expect a strong response. Trading partners expect their shipping lanes to be defended. Domestic audiences expect their government not to look weak after, their citizens or their economic interests were directly harmed. All of that pressure converges into the kind of fast, forceful response the world witnessed this morning. This is also why watching the reaction of oil markets matters just as much as watching the military strikes themselves. Markets do not wait for official statements. They move the instant traders believe supply could be at risk. And they move even faster when a choke point as critical as this one is involved. The jump in oil prices this morning was not driven by confirmed damage to the flow of oil. It was driven by fear of what could happen if this situation spirals further. That distinction matters. Fear-driven price spikes can fade quickly if tensions calm down. But if tensions do not calm down, if another ship is hit, or if the strait itself becomes genuinely unsafe to pass through, that fear turns into something far more damaging and far more permanent. This is exactly why the diplomatic signals happening quietly in the background carry so much weight right now. A back channel that stays open, even after a violent morning like this one, is not nothing. It is often the difference between a crisis that peaks and a crisis that spreads. Diplomats rarely announce these channels publicly while they are active, which is exactly why most people watching the news never hear about them until much later, if they hear about them at all. But intelligence and defense officials watching this situation closely are paying very close attention to whether that channel stays open or goes silent in the coming hours. Before we close this out, if this video helped you actually understand what is happening in the Gulf right now, instead of just reacting to a headline, share it with someone who has been asking you what is going on over there. A 5-minute conversation with a friend explaining this clearly is worth more than an hour of scrolling through confusing, conflicting headlines. That is the whole reason this channel exists, to cut through the noise and give you the real picture, not just the loudest version of it. Because here is the truth underneath everything you just watched. Wars are not only fought with missiles and warships, they are fought in the seconds between an attack and a decision, in the silence of a government trying to figure out its next move, and in the quiet back channels that most of the world never sees until years later. What happened this morning in the Strait of Hormuz was fast, brutal, and impossible to ignore. But the real story is not finished. It is still being written hour by hour, decision by decision, somewhere between a burning tanker and a government that has not yet decided how far it is willing to go. That is where the story stands right now, not at an ending, at a turning point. And turning points like this one do not stay quiet for long.